What a headshot! What a head!
How's it, guys? This is Dayvy, FPL, and welcome back to the Fantasy Premier League video here on my channel. In this video, I'll be going through the annual pricing mistakes video, definitely my favorite video of the preseason. So if you guys are new to the channel, basically what we'll be doing in this video is deciding whether FPL has actually made any pricing mistakes, and that's going to be if any players underpriced or overpriced. So we'll be going through the stats and seeing if FPL has actually stepped up their game, as most people are saying this preseason. So can't wait to get over all the graphs and show you guys my insights. Now this video took quite a bit of effort. I think the graphs have definitely had an upgrade on the previous seasons. So if you guys do enjoy it, make sure that you like the video as well as subscribe for all the preseason content. But if you guys are as excited as myself to see which players are underpriced and overpriced, sit back, relax, and let's get straight into it. Now if you guys are actually new to this series or you just want a refresher of the context behind this video, I'll be going through a number of talking points just to lay things out. Now the first thing I want to say is that prices are not only dependent on points. Yes, I know in this video we're only going to be looking at the points and the relationship, but there's a level of subjectivity that does come into pricing, and that could depend on whether a player moves clubs. Just one example where there might be some doubt or some gain to a particular player. Let's for example say the penalty taker for a respective club has departed the team. The secondary penalty taker probably has a bit more kind of popularity, as they should be taking penalties. Now they might have not scored a ton of points last season, but with those penalties now they could actually be looking like quite a good asset. FPL might actually rank them slightly higher than what their points per million said last season. Also quite hard to judge players that are entering a squad for the first time, like a Kudos, West Ham to Spurs. What effect has that had on his points? We can't really say that, and I guess FPL can't judge it either. So I just want to clarify that even though points are pretty essential, there will be one or two things that kind of make this a bit more subjective. So just keep that in mind as we go through the players. Now the second thing I want to clarify is that we're not going to be going over every single player. I've only selected players with at least 15 games, or basically 1,350 minutes. Now the thinking behind kind of 15 games is I still wanted to go over players that signed in the January window, and I'll allow them to miss 1 or 2 games to injury, and that takes us to 15 games. Now yes, there might be some players here, for example Kieran Trippier, he didn't get 1,350 minutes last season, but had pretty good overall numbers, and therefore if he plays the majority of minutes this season, he could be a great asset. Now when I do go over the specific kind of positional review videos, I might be going and dropping this filter quite a bit, just so that we do kind of target the most defenders as possible, for example. Now the second and third point do relate to those FPL changes. The first one is I have actually included positional changes, like a Jared Bowen, who's now a forward. So yes, I've actually gone and done these numbers. I've put this in the pipeline to incorporate the positional changes. Not a lot has actually happened, only a few, but still worth including them. Then the third talking point is going to be about those defensive points. So yes, I've actually included these as well. Now this will be a very kind of initial approach to it. I've just averaged the stats over 90 minutes. Whoever was above the threshold is included. And once again, when I go over those positional reviews, we'll pay this a bit more attention. So at least you guys will be getting the most up-to-date numbers though, including these positional and defensive changes. And the final talking point just relates to the kind of average I've used, and that's going to be a linear regression line. Now yes, there's a whole bunch of other methods that you guys can look at. If you don't think the relationship is linear, you can go into a bunch of other kind of averaging methods, but for the video, it's just simpler to have a linear regression line, and that's going to be the red line that you guys see on every graph. Now I've also changed the linear regression line depending on what players are on screen. You'll see, for example, in your midfielders, I've taken out Salah because he's just so much more expensive. And then I've updated the linear regression line to reflect the players and the dots you guys see. Just something small that I want to remind you guys about. Yes, it is simple, but it's a good kind of visual method. We can discuss in the comments down below if you guys want to go over any other methodology. But enough waffling about the actual kind of context. Let's go over some actual numbers. We're going to start off with the most exciting position, and that's the goalkeepers. The one thing I want to note though is that there has been a bonus point change this season. I didn't incorporate that as it didn't make too much of a difference. So the keepers on screen have played at least 15 games. There were some heavy rotation pairs last season, which were quite surprising. And it seems like a very popular 5.0 price tag for the majority of Premier League goalkeepers. Now unfortunately, there's not going to be any kind of promoted goalkeepers here or new entries. We'll discuss those when we go over the actual positional reviews. So first thing that kind of shoots out to me is going to be that maximum Edison just above 4.2 points per 90 minutes. I've done 90 minutes as it does average out players and doesn't bias them according to games played. So I know that Edison gets quite a lot of hate, but actually it looks like his numbers were great last season. Just quite hard to predict when he's going to get injured and when he's going to be back fit. The ever popular Pickford has got that 5.5 kind of price tag. Interesting to see that the maximum goalkeepers are all 5.5. Similar to the defenders, we've had a cap. Now if you guys do look at these kind of players, you'll see Raya amongst the premiums provides the least value, but is quite a nice buy into that Arsenal defense if you guys just want to go for the clean sheets. I would probably say though that I'm more looking to the 4.5 bracket. Now you guys will notice not a lot of goalkeepers here, and that's because most of them are either new or in newly promoted squads. FPL has made the majority of goalkeepers around 5.0. Now unfortunately Kepa, even though he's the best 4.5, now that he's joined Arsenal, I doubt that he gets many minutes, and therefore Jose Sarr from Wolves is probably your most sensible 4.5 at the moment. If you like myself though, I've got Keller here. You won't see Flecken as he has departed the league, but I'll bring up his numbers from last season when you do go over those positional goalkeeper reviews. I won't lie though, the goalkeepers aren't the most exciting position. I just want to showcase them. It's a nice little entry into these graphs. Let's now move on to a more exciting position, probably the forwards. So the forwards this season, you guys are going to be seeing on the far right hand side, Erling Haaland quite below that linear regression line. But what I always say with these premiums is just remember that you probably will captain them, and therefore you can almost double Haaland's points, and then he's far in the green. Now that we've already spoken about Haaland though, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove him because, as mentioned, you're probably going to captain him most game weeks, and therefore it becomes a little bit redundant. Let's go over those kind of defensive changes, if any, as well as positional changes, and changing the regression line to average without Haaland. You guys can see that Isaac actually goes from being good value to being kind of on the line, but you probably will captain him every once in a while, so I guess there's that. So looking at these kind of points per 90 minutes, we've got some good value options. Beto's been pretty popular at around 5.5. And nice to see that Danny Welbeck also provides good value at 6.5 as he was in my first draft. Like with all Nottingham Forest players, if Chris Wood can replicate the form of last season, he's going to be great value, but I have my doubts and therefore probably won't be looking at him. The most popular option though in FPL at the moment is definitely João Pedro. He comes in with some good stats, but just remember, these are from Brighton. And then Visa also provides good value, but there's been a bunch of transfer talks dropping today. Now before you guys get excited about a potential Jared Bowen, I actually want to incorporate here the positional changes, and you can see that he now drops below that linear regression line. So unfortunately what's going to be happening with Jared Bowen this season is he drops an extra point per goal as well as the clean sheet points. And what I also want to include here is that Jared Bowen had a great season last season, so if he keeps up the numbers, he could be okay, but that's probably going to be quite a hard feat to do. So now having looked at this positional change, he's basically the only player that has unfortunately shifted down. That has moved the linear regression line, so Isaac is back to being okay value. Also shout out to Ollie Watkins, quite consistent and ever reliable. Now some outside punts there, Strand Larsen also provides good value, but the one that you probably have been looking at is Dom Solanke, and that's kind of the reason I was speaking about those subjectivity things, and he's kind of the reason I was talking about those different subjects, because he might actually still be good value even though his points per million aren't that great. So we spoke about a potential penalty taker leaving the club with Heung-min Son. He's the Spurs penalty taker, but don't exactly know how many minutes he'll be getting this Premier League season. So therefore Dom Solanke could be the first choice penalty taker, which does raise his stock quite a bit. So you guys don't have to see Dom Solanke in the red and immediately avoid him. It does raise questions though about the Spurs form. They weren't great last season, as well as himself, not the most prolific striker and not the most prolific team. If they do have a shake-up, same with the United assets, both clubs had pretty terrible seasons. If they can rebound this season, they could be good value. Otherwise the forwards, I won't lie, don't look that great this season. With most people avoiding Erling Haaland, who can you guys actually go for? Probably some of these cheaper options. Are you backing Chris Wood to actually have another great season? Now the next position will be the defenders, and unfortunately guys, I do apologize, we are getting a bit congested in terms of the labels. This is just simply because we are increasing the amount of players we have as the positions do go on. But don't worry, in the positional reviews when I do go over the defenders, I will split them out quite nicely. So the graph that you guys see on screen right now will just simply be the total points for last season, as shortly we'll be shifting to those defensive contributions, as that could lead some players to being pretty strong. So I want to do the comparison because let's see if our centre backs suddenly shoot up and destroy the fullbacks, but there's actually only a few defenders that really get that average of defensive contribution. So let's bring up the defensive contributions included, and this is basically the first real position that we can talk about the contributions. The way I calculated this was I took the average over 90 minutes of each of these players, and then if their defensive contributions were above 10, as that's the limit for the defenders, it will add whatever points they would have scored over how many games they played. So for example, Murillo from Nottingham Forest, he's just an absolute giant in terms of defensive contributions. Same with Tarkowski from Everton. So you would have seen that these players were in and around that linear regression line without the defensive contributions, but once those have been added, they look like absolute giants. I mean, just compare them to the right hand side there, Gabriel, Guardiola, Virgil van Dijk. The main reason for this is these players are actually doing the defending. It's almost like a goalkeeper from a good team not making any saves. Now also shout out to the Crystal Palace options. We have Richards and Lacroix. Both these players kind of featured towards that end of the season where Crystal Palace were doing super well, and that's reflective of their per 90 minute stats. If you guys do want to get an indication more, just look a little bit down there at the 4.5s to Gay, and that's probably the average of Crystal Palace's entire season. Tosin for Chelsea also was playing when they were keeping clean sheets, so just keep that in mind when you guys do look at the numbers. But also quite nice to see Wan-Bissaka there at 4.5, providing good value. I also want to say that Diogo Dalot, even though United had a terrible season, he does look okay. If they can improve, he might be good value at 4.5. Otherwise 5.0 might be the cheapest that you guys pay for an Everton defender with O'Brien or Mikalenko. Now obviously with these defensive contributions, I will go over them in more depth when we go over the positional review, as it might not be fair to just use the average, as most of these players were below the average for 90 minutes. What that does tell you though, is that these players won't be scoring 2 points every single game, and therefore as mentioned might be worth looking at some cheaper options from worse defenses that might rack up that 2 points slightly quicker. I'll leave that debate though later on, as there's a lot of talking points about it. Should you go for centre backs now over fullbacks? Let's cover that when we go over the defenders in depth. Now the last position I want to touch on is going to be the midfielders, the last position to talk about, probably the most exciting position to be honest. And here's every midfielder that has played over 15 games last season. Now like with Erling Haaland, Mo Salah, you're going to captain him every single week so you'll double his points, providing great value. Let's remove him now though, to just give yourself a better reflection of these cheaper midfielders. So without the Egyptian king, we've got Saka and Palmer below the line. I would probably say the last season wasn't their best seasons, especially Cole Palmer. He has held his price tag though, and has looked better in the Club World Cup. Bruno Fernandes, even though he has racked up a few points with those defensive contributions, the midfielders are actually at 12 defensive contributions, but they also incorporate recoveries. So Bruno was just below that, I think he was around 11.2, something like that. So no defensive contributions as of the averages, but definitely will have in some games. So one to watch out for, and definitely on my watch list, as he sometimes is playing quite a defensive position. One thing that you guys will notice, actually let me go over that graph without the defensive contributions. You'll notice on the left hand side, a lot of these cheaper options do fade away. So now going back to his defensive contributions, a player like an Anderson at 5.5 could be great value for money, or McAllister at a slightly more expensive 6.5, as he does get the odd goal and assist. What these defensive contributions have allowed us to do is target more kind of defensive minded players, and someone I want to shout out is actually Gakpo, as he has had a positional change, but he also racks up defensive work. So in Arne Slot's squad, every player is kind of relied on to be defensive, and that's why Luis Diaz also shines quite brightly here. Cunha, the new United player, also provides good value, but he's scored so many bangers last season. How repeatable is that going to be? I guess it's a wait and see at the moment. Just below him, Mbeumo as well comes in for United. Now both these two players overperformed their goals and assists. If they can do it again though, they could be great value, as I think we have the funds for about an 8.0 midfielder in most of our first drafts. You guys can actually pause though if you want to go over some other players to talk about. Don't worry though, we will be going over this in a lot more depth. And then it's going to be a little bit less cluttered. As I mentioned, apologize if you guys can't read anything, but I think most of the players you can kind of take out. Hope you guys did enjoy this video. This was kind of the starter though to the pricing review. We will be going over each position as mentioned, the goalkeepers, defenders, midfielders, and finally forwards. Can't wait to delve deeper into those positions and really talk about the different stats. This video though did require quite a bit of effort, especially including the defensive and the positional changes. Hopefully it was all worth it though if you guys do enjoy the video. Tons of content still coming up for the preseason. This is basically our video guys. Hope you guys did enjoy it. Please like it and subscribe if you have subscribed yet. Tons of content still to come up, so make sure those notifications are turned on. But for the time being, I'm signing off. This has been Dayvy FPL and I'm out. Cheers, bye.